In this particular video, we're going to go through and take a look at the Abbey Road Orchestra Low Percussion library. Low Percussion is the first product that is going to be released in the Abbey Road Orchestra range. Now, before we dive in and take a look at each control, what it is and how it works, I'd just like to point out that this range of products, the Abbey Road Orchestra, is totally different to the range of products which is the Orchestral Foundations library and the Film Scoring Selections. The Film Scoring Selections and the Orchestral Foundations library are very much designed around this idea of quick scoring using ensemble patches. Whereas the Abbey Road Orchestra is going to be Spitfire's most detailed orchestral library to date, and it is going to give complete individual control to every section for really detailed orchestration. So let's dive in and take a look at each control. So starting in the left-hand corner, we have the LED light, which is going to be an indication of whether your samples are still loading. If this is flickering red and green, wait a little while. When it's solid green, you can then hit play in your DAW or start playing on your MIDI keyboard. The CPU meter is an indication of how hard the processor of our machine is working. The disk meter is an indication of how hard our samples drive is working. If you start noticing audio dropouts, take a look at these two meters. If either of them are flickering red, then we know we need to do some optimizations in order to make things run a little bit more smoothly. We then have the memory meter, which is an indication of how much sample content is preloaded into the RAM of your machine. Next to the memory meter, we have the voices meter. Now this is an indication of how many audio threads we're streaming at any particular one point in time. To the right of this, we have the refresh icon, and this can also be right-clicked to see some further options. Use this if you have anything such as sticking MIDI notes. Moving further to the right, we then have the MIDI channels option, which is where we can isolate the plugin on a particular MIDI channel. If you'd like to use key switching via MIDI channels, this should be set to any. To the right of this, we then have a global tuning and a global panning control, followed by a master volume. Moving to the end of the top menu, we have two settings options. We have the preset settings, which is where we can see a whole range of different settings which are designed to affect the preset only. Starting at the top of this list, we have the dynamics controls. Now, this particular control is going to change the different behaviors of the dynamics fader, which is located in the middle of the interface. So when we click this drop-down menu, we can see that we have the full velocity range, which is going to allow the modulation wheel to control the full range of the dynamic layers. The velocity mapped to dynamics will allow you to control short note velocities, but using the modulation wheel. So how hard and soft you hit the keys will get turned off, and that will be then controlled by the modulation wheel. This setting will affect short articulations, such as the individual hits in this library. The two different compressed options allows you to set the behavior of the dynamics fader to limit the performance of the library to a particular dynamic layer. So if you'd like to keep the percussion on a little bit of a lower dynamic overall, but not care too much about how hard or soft you're hitting the keys, using this compressed velocity low or high feature is going to be a really useful way of working. Moving further down, we then have the velocity curve options. Now, cycling through these will enable you to change the response of the plugin to find a more comfortable performance to the MIDI controller velocity that you are using. So if you have, for example, a controller where you have to hit the keys quite hard in order to get the top level of dynamic out of the library, you would change this to be exponential positive. By default, this is set to linear velocity. If you have a keyboard which is where it's easier to get to the higher end velocities, we would change this to be the exponential negative. The CC mappings option will allow us to clear all the MIDI CCs on the user interface and reset them as well back to their defaults if you have decided to change them. The sync to tempo option isn't used in the low percussion library. We then have the voice choking option. This will allow single hits to interrupt any particular roll. So if you've got a roll held down and you decide to all of a sudden hit an individual sample, it will cut off the roll and just play the individual sample. The roll end option is where we've recorded natural hits to be placed at the end of a roll. It's worthwhile keeping this on at all times for ultimate realism. Now the soft takeover again applies to the roll techniques. Now when this is turned on, the roll keys become velocity sensitive, i.e. how hard or soft you hit the keys, and it no longer responds to the dynamics fader. But what does happen to the dynamics fader is it becomes active once the modulation wheel moves past the level of velocity that you have hit the key with. The short releases option isn't available in this library. To the right of this, we then have the plugin settings, which is where we can adjust things on the interface, such as its size, its key switching range. We then have the audio options, which is where we can make some optimizations, such as how much sample content is loaded into the RAM of our machine. And we then have the plugin option, which is where we can change the default preset. For example, you might wish to have the plugin open without a preset. We click save at the bottom to make any changes. I'm not going to go through every single setting in this particular video, but if you'd like to learn more about all the global settings of the plugin, please do see the user manual. So moving down the plugin, we then have the collapsed and expanded view. And to the left of this, we have the preset bar, which is where we can use the arrows to cycle through the presets. We also have a floppy disk icon, which is where we can save our own custom preset once we've made changes to it. So for example, if we've made MIDI CC alterations, for example to have the dynamics fader respond to a different MIDI CC, we could then save that as a user preset to load each time. Moving to the left, we then have the drop-down menu for the entire preset list. Now for those custom presets, which we've just saved, they show up in the user filter on the left-hand side. As time goes on, this will become more compact with different filter options, but at the moment we've only released the low percussion library. However, at the top we have individual filters for each individual drum type, so if I'd like to see only the taikos, I can press the taiko filter. There is a clear button at the top. To the right of this we have a favourites option, which is where we can see any starred preset in the starred filter. We can preview a sound by hitting the play icon, and if we hover over the eye we can see a little bit of information about that particular preset. We can load a patch by double-clicking or clicking and pressing the load button at the bottom. Moving down the interface, we have the expression control. Expression is a volume control that operates inside the master volume of the library. We then have the dynamics control, which will allow us to crossfade between different dynamics, depending on the dynamics behavior we had selected in the preset settings, which were shown earlier in the video. To the right of this, we then have the reverb control, which when clicked will show us also the tightness option. The tightness control will eat into the start of the sample in order to speed up the response of the performances. Moving down the interface once more, we then have the technique view. The technique view is where we can see all the different articulations which are available for that particular preset. In the top right hand corner, we have the technique editor, which will allow us to remove different techniques from a preset if we'd like to remove those from the RAM of our machine. We can then move the order of these techniques around. We can also do everything we can in the preset menu, such as preview a sound, learn more about that particular articulation, and then we can save that to make the changes. Moving to the right hand side, we have the key switching options. If we change the trigger method, we can see a range of options which will allow us to change the key switching method for that particular technique. So if I wanted to change the method of switching on the hard felt, which is currently set to key switch, I would choose from this drop down menu CC range. And if I also wanted to choose the brushes to be CC range, I would need to select the brushes and then change the CC range here as well. We can change all the techniques depending on a key switch, so this is going to be your generic key switches, C-1 upwards. We then have the CC range, which is where we can change it depending on a MIDI CC value. The velocity range is how hard or soft we hit the keys in order to change articulation. We can then set the MIDI channel for each individual technique. This is quite a useful feature for those who like to create multiple MIDI channels in your DAW for different articulations. We can change the techniques on how fast we hit the keys, so if we play quite fast we can change. And we then also have the program change. The conditions for each individual switching method is set directly below. And below this, we also have the activate function, which is where you can choose between an active and a latched state of key switching. When this is in latch mode, it means that the articulation will temporarily change to the one that you've selected before switching back to the one that you had selected previously. Moving down the interface again, we have the round robin options. So here we can see there are 12. We have the reset on transport function, which is where the round robins will reset every time you hit play in your DAW. The reset from key allows you to place key switches on the keyboard, which will then enable the user to specifically choose a round robin they like, or they can key switch out a round robin that they maybe do not like. The round robin options isn't available in this library. We then have a transpose function, which will change where the techniques lie on the keyboard. I advise keeping this as default because the way the mapping works in low percussion means if you decide you wish to use a different performance type for that particular technique, it means you only have to transpose up the MIDI data. We then have the two-handed layout. So the two-handed mapping, when enabled, places a duplicate of the drum mapping 2 octaves higher on the keyboard. This will allow you to perform on the keyboard using both hands. You then have right and left mapping, which is a new feature in the Abbey Road Low Percussion library. Now, when this is enabled, you'll note a slight gradient in the colour has changed on the keys at the bottom. Now, when this is enabled, the mapping on the keyboard changes to accommodate this left and right hand beta recordings that we've done. So, for example, if C1 is left hand samples that have been recorded, D1 will be the right hand samples that have been recorded for the technique selected. When this is disabled, this becomes a 2-finger mapping setup, which is where C1 and D1 will just cycle through the round robins for the same technique, where you can perform with 2 fingers instead of just pressing 1 finger on the note at all times. At the very top, we have the lock, which is where we can lock all these settings in place. Next to the padlock, we also have the keyboard shimmier, which is where we can click and drag the default key switches around on the keyboard. By default, these are set out of view, and you would need to transpose the keyboard down using these 2 arrows at the bottom to see the key switching. Moving to the next page using the view selecting toggles at the middle of the interface, we have the signal view. In the top left-hand corner, we can choose to save, and once we've saved a preset, load a preset for the mixer. We have the advanced and global view. Now, the advanced view, when turned off, will give us a simple version of this whole signal interface, which is where we can choose a close or far mix. Now, if we change that, it will be reflected when we look back on this page. The global option, when disabled, allows you to set different mic mixes for different articulations. So this means, for example, if you had something where you wanted a really snappy sound for one particular drum hit, you could have the close microphones dialed in. And if you wanted a more ambient sound for another drum hit, you could change that to have a more ambient sound as well. You can change the level by clicking and dragging any particular signal. And you can toggle any signal off either by clicking and dragging all the way down, or by using the toggles at the bottom. A new feature to the Abbey Road Low Percussion library is the ability to mute and solo different signals, so you can audition and hear exactly how they behave. To the right of this, we have a stereo width and panning control for the close and spot signals. And we can also invert the left and right channels. At the very bottom, we have these 2 arrows which allow us to cycle through to see even more signals. And again, in this top right hand corner, we have a padlock which enables us to lock it in place. Moving through to the effects page, we can see all the effects that are available on the knob at the top. Now, if you have any further questions about Abbey Road Orchestra or low percussion, please do get in touch with us at spitfireaudio.com/support.
Thanks for watching Spitfire Clips. Let us know if it was too long, too short, too fast, or too slow in the comments down below. Hit like if we answered your question, and subscribe for more clips, tips, tricks, and exclusive Spitfire content.